SDCLH continuum there, which shortens their route just because they have a service out in Bay Point now. But we also have some students, that program happens to be located at Rio Vista. We have students that are from the Bel Air attendance area. If we're to pick them up door by door by door, those students are still going to ride that bus for a much more extensive period of time than if all of them met at Bel Air and jumped on a bus. We want students to be on the bus the least amount of time as possible, because every extended bus ride makes them less ready for school. They're up that much longer before they even get to school. So we're always looking at least restrictive environment. That clustering model, we anticipate, will significantly reduce the amount of time that our district bus drivers are spending routing the kids that already qualify for transportation. Once we go to that clustering model, if we can do it efficiently and effectively and still provide safe transportation, what that will do is that will allow our own bus drivers to look, and again, look at those routes that Mickey Pawar is currently driving, and look at those, some of those, and if you look at them, and I'd certainly be more than happy to provide the board with some more detailed analysis of the students that he's driving. There are some that, for example, are a dangerous student. They're being driven one by one because of the behavioral needs of that particular student. But there's several students that he's driving because the length of the route to where those students are going to school is in Fremont or in Oakland or different parts of the East Bay, where we just, right now, we couldn't afford to have our district drivers because they're driving our own kids. We just don't have enough drivers to drive those longer routes. So we've used him for the very long routes. And when we get those routes back, and we've, again, Muskoka and I, we've been talking regularly and looking at that list and saying, okay, which students can you take back? And again, being respectful, and by program. So can you take back this program? Can you take back this program? And being respectful that we've got a contractor that has been very beneficial to our district. So we want to honor his 30 days that we have to give him and so forth, that we need to notice him before we take students back off of his contract. So we're constantly looking at that, and the more we free up our drivers here, we can take more of those contracts back. I agree with you that the AA Med Trans contract, which is coming up next, many of those students, we also are looking at those too, because we have some that we can take back too. So we're not just looking at the Pawar contract, we're looking at both of them.
Well, and again, I separate by individual student and their needs, because that's what we're looking to service, are individual students and their needs. So medically fragile, severely emotionally disturbed kids who may have acting out or violent behavior where drivers aren't necessarily prepared for that. There's some differences that might occur where you need an additional service. I don't see an ongoing evidence in two ways. Again, one is some of the things you're describing, I never see that specific documentation discussed or presented. I see a number of kids that we might need to bus with Pawar, which is essentially kind of what I consider a cab service. I mean, it's kind of a door-to-door individual ride, so it gets quite expensive. But secondly, the clustering is something that I've heard from some parents on. Actually, I was surprised when I heard it here at the board meeting, because it was the first I'd heard that clustering was even something that was being considered. So I was surprised by that, and then I was surprised when I got some questions around the clustering and some serious questions around when you start to group kids, and I don't think we've actually spelled it out. I don't know, maybe there's a letter I missed that went out on clustering. But in terms of the concerns from parents about taking kids to a central location and then, you know, taking service from there is kind of something that has to be communicated, I think, to parents when you change the method of service. So I was surprised on the clustering. I frankly didn't have the answers when the questions popped up to me. And I think at some point for us to explain that better, the motivation, the justification, how it's being organized, the reassurance to parents that kids will not be left somewhere at another location, you know, with group because they're grouping them now to pick them up. So I think there are questions that I've encountered around clustering, which you probably don't have because you're living it. But when community members don't live it and don't get the information in a coherent manner, then they have those questions. And I don't have them, so I think it'd be helpful to have something come forward. Maybe it's already been done and I just missed it, around the clustering, the philosophy, the plan, the motivation, the cost savings, the reassurance to parents on what that means for my child who needs transportation. But I think this is an area that I have serious concerns about when we talk about trying to make some cost savings. This is one of those areas, and I think it's one of those areas where you have to look weekly at drivers' routes and reflect and reassign and look at who's driving over hours, who's driving under hours. Is there a better way? As the kids change, and maybe all this is going on and I, again, don't get that information, but I don't feel I'm sitting here tonight with enough documentation and to support this at this time. So I think this is a strong problem that we need to address more clearly with information. And, I mentioned a couple of the specifics, for example, around clustering. If that's a way to look at saving costs in transportation, then we need to put together some information that would be presented to the community around the justification and the cost savings and the reassurance.
Ms. Mayo, you have.
Well, earlier or late in last year, on the June 25th board meeting, there's a PDF that's attached that includes some further information about the Pawar contract. I recognize that there probably aren't the same number of students being serviced at this particular moment, but the primary cost was for transportation of students to non-public schools. In June of 2011, it was at 29, and in June of 2012, it was at 83 students. The state and county program transportation was basically the same, being 43 students and 42 students for the same time. The transportation between school district sites was 10 in 2011 and was down to 7 in 2012. I think this is an area that changes constantly as our students' needs change. I recognize that you are asking for more information, and I appreciate that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we have received some information in the past about the types of students that are being transported by Pawar.
And I understand the types of students being transported. My question is more around an articulated, published plan that shows, and I understand the student needs change as well, absolutely. And I'm suggesting that it be regularly monitored and flexible, because students pop up who need some additional service or service in another way. And I think that's what we need to start communicating to our public, is as we begin to reflect on some of these changes in how we deliver transportation services. How are we communicating that out? And how are we justifying this? And how are we presenting the cost savings for it? And how are we reflecting upon our drivers that we do have, and whether or not they can provide more of that service internally and still, get those students to where they need to go. So I continue to have questions around this, and I think it needs to be more coherent type of plan. And every time a change in this area, this is a very sensitive area, I think, special ed transportation particularly. And every time there's a change within that area, I think we have to be careful on how we present this to the community and how we get that information out. And we need to saturate them with the information and constantly reflect and study it.
Okay, any other board discussion? Not? Go ahead, Mr. Bart.
I guess it's the questioning is being, it seems like it's being utilized to indicate that perhaps we're not doing all the things that we can to find efficient ways to